Hi everyone, Justin here from Game On with a very polarizing video today. D&D 5th edition has been out for 6 years this month. 6 years! With the beginner box coming out in July 2014 and the player's handbook releasing on August 19th of 2014. Through those years, I've literally played thousands of hours of this game. Through Adventurers League at cons and my favorite local game store, homebrew stuff, and even play testing the game in D&D Next. I've been following the life cycle of this game as an enthusiast, and today we're going to take a look at all my experience with the game and talk about it as a whole. We're going to be talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. As a disclaimer, I'm not a professional game designer. All of what I'm going to say is a subjective opinion, and yours may differ. That's perfectly fine. Again, these opinions are my own, and I'm not here to bash the game Matt and I have enjoyed playing so much. But I do wish to say that of all these points I will bring up, have at least a few people I have met that feel the same way, so I know I'm not the only one. Also, if you like the content, don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to break these up into 3 categories. Good things about the game. This is the section where I discuss what keeps bringing me back. This is where I praise the game for the great things it has done. Bad things about the game. This section is about things that irk me as a player and a DM. They have a good news and a bad news vibe to them, or at least they can be fixed with some extra work by the DM or the table as a whole. Not a deal breaker. And finally, the ugly. This section will discuss parts of the game that I have a hard time accepting, mechanics or just overall design issues that make me want to play another game besides 5th edition. If at the end you think I missed something in one of these categories, let us know in the comments. You'll see some gameplay of the Elder Scrolls Online in the background because it's better than staring at a black screen as well. Okay, phew, let's get started. We're starting with the good because I want everyone to know that I do in fact have a soft spot for this game. I'd like to acknowledge the success and popularity of D&D 5th edition. Having talked to longtime players and even using myself as an example, 5th edition pulled people back into D&D. It's the edition that people are still, to this day, hyped about. I came back to D&D after taking a break from Pathfinder and trying to fill my desire to play an RPG with other systems. Call of Cthulhu, Fate, etc. Dungeons & Dragons was play-tested at our FLGS, and it brought back many of us to the game. The changes between the playtest and D&D Next, with 5th edition aside, there was almost entirely a brand new system. Gone were the days of half of your character sheet having skills and putting 3 plus your int mod per level of skills into your sheet. Gone were the days of +1 here and +1 there, and a minus here because of this and oh yeah, a minus here because of that when shooting your arrows. The advantage-disadvantage mechanic that was made popular by 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons basically took away all the hard number crunching. Now we'll touch on this a little bit again in another section, but this was the easiest edition of D&D I've ever had to try to teach. At cons and my FLGS, I was able to teach people Dungeons & Dragons 5th much quicker and thoroughly than the 3.x and Pathfinder. The days of calculating ACs using 4 different boxes were in the past. Now you just look at an armor table and add your dex mod. Proficiency streamlined the process of character creation and play. Are you proficient in martial weapons? Then you can add your proficiency when making attacks. Are you proficient in a special skill? Well, now you get to add your proficiency bonus on top of your characteristics mod. No worrying about skill points or taking penalties from non-class skills. Something as simple as making the dang saves the same name as the characteristics is based off of is very helpful. Fortitude saves no longer represent your constitution. Your constitution represents your constitution. And your wisdom saves are no longer called will saves, they're just called wisdom saves. You make a dex save based off of your dexterity and your proficiency. That's it. It doesn't seem like a big deal, but just using the same language makes the game so much easier to teach. Yes, dexterity and reflex can mean the same thing in your head, but explaining to a new player that your reflex save is dexterity plus your other mods that you get from your class plus this and that can cause their eyes to glaze over. Another great thing, we finally have support for backgrounds. Instead of having to beseech the DM to allow you to take skills in a certain area because your backstory suggests it, is now supported mechanically in your background. Plus the background features allow you to better customize your player adaptation. No one came to the table with a rogue? Well, maybe my sorcerer has the criminal background now and has access to thieves' tools. Are you a fighter who wants to have a heroic story before the adventure starts? Take Folk Hero, and you'll be recognized for the awesome things that you've done. If you don't like the backgrounds which are offered in the player's handbook, just take a look at one of the many books offered in post-launch content. This subject will be in another section as well, but for the most part, the steady stream of post-launch content from Wizards of the Coast has been good. We're not drip-fed little things here and there, but we're given decent-sized content once or twice a year. Second and third and even fourth released so many books so quickly that you'd think that they had just learned about the printing press. The add-ons to this game have been steady and decent quality enough to keep people purchasing. The books themselves are generally well laid out, though don't ask Matt for his opinion on that, and it's written in a natural language that's easy enough to understand, yet vague enough to allow the DM to make rulings instead of having every little thing have a sub-rule. I'm also happy to say that if all you have is the player's handbook, you won't be left behind from the players who are building for multiple books. It's not a pay-to-win mechanic. I like that the game is being targeted to audiences outside of just hobbyists. Trying to sell D&D stuff at the local game store is basically preaching to the choir, but seeing the Essentials kit at Target makes me happy now that more people are seeing the game as a game, and not some cult or exclusive oddity. Adventurers League, for all its faults, has shown that a standardized league play can bring in all types, and that the game is still growing. The game has been marketed well, and generally the sage advice and unearthed arcana gives us players extra options and clarifications. Developers have stayed decently involved in the community, and I've had the pleasure of meeting Jeremy Crawford at Gen Con, and he was just as excited for the game as we were. So it shows that the developers have a decent handle on the game that they've created. Now finally, to round out the good, I will say something very controversial, and that is, I like concentration spells. No more flying invisible wizards surrounded by a protection bubble. It reins in the crazy magic from older editions that basically made a wizard the only class needed in higher tiers. Because a spellcaster no longer can, quote, do everything, it opens the sandbox more for classes to synergize off of each other, and creates a dynamic of just about every class fairly represented at the table. And this leads me to the bad. One of the criticisms D&D 5th gets is that it's a little too simple. The proficiency in skills can feel shallow, and specializations in certain areas no longer necessarily feels right. For example, we have a rogue player with a decent intelligence and has expertise in arcana. Because the skill proficiency is doubled with their expertise, the rogue is mechanically speaking, quote, better at arcana than the wizard. The wizard has an 8 in arcana, and the rogue has a 10. It's only greater by 2, but it feels slightly off that each class doesn't have its own expertise in one skill it should be known for. And as much as I praise the skills for being only a small part of the character sheet, sometimes it leaves a little bit to be desired. Example, if I want to build a character who is known for their ability to quickly disable a trap or MacGyver up a way to jam a door, but isn't very good at picking pockets, I have to take proficiency in sleight of hand no matter what. Yet, the mechanic suggests that I'd be good at pickpocketing as well. It's up to the players to roleplay that, and I give it props for making the player take more control of what they do and do not want to be, quote, proficient in, but players still tend to think in numbers on the sheet, and having abilities like Disable Device and Sleight of Hand / Pickpocket rolled into one generic proficiency can turn some players off. Luckily, with some extra legwork, the DM can allow for proficiencies to be rearranged for certain tasks. The DMG has rules for that, and the DM can house rule that every class has expertise in one special skill, so it can be fixed with some extra legwork, hence why it's in the bad category. Another point for the bad category, which can be fixed with variant rules or extra work by the DM, is combat in general. Combat doesn't have that edge it does in other games. Case in point, the players I ran through a 5th edition game then played Call of Cthulhu, which by the way, we have played before. They got stuck in the habit thinking that they couldn't die, and well, they died in the Call of Cthulhu game. That's a very anecdotal example, but it seems the general sentiment that 5th edition combat isn't very dangerous. A deadly rating on the CR scale, which has its own faults, may mean that one player drops to 0. Death in D&D 5th is very hard to come by, especially in league play. Making your current maximum health what you need to reach under 0 to instantly die as opposed to your con mod or even the con score basically gives you double health. Now, I'm not saying that you literally have double hit points, but to outright kill a player with 10 HP at level 1, the monster will have to do 20 HP worth of damage in basically one go. Maybe 11 if the character is at exactly 1 hit point. But, oh, death saves. Death saves are a great feature, and I like the uncertainty of stabilization while at 0 hit points. Generally speaking, a 10 or higher is slightly statistically easier to get 3 of before 9 or worse. However, a medicine check or spare the dying automatically stabilizes you, and a heal spell pops you back up to whatever value you heal. On top of all that, all your death saves reset, so in theory, you can drop, get back up, drop, get back up, and so forth for as long as you get healed or stabilized. Now, you can counteract this by making death saves permanent per long rest. There is a variant rule for that, or you can beef up the monsters to be more deadly. So it's technically fixable with variant rules and just throwing more monsters at the party, but it can be a little bit more work intensive, hence that's why in the bad section. You know what else is annoying? The action economy. The action economy in 5th is kind of hit or miss. I'm happy that you don't need feats to move, attack, and move, and I'm glad it's more simplistic with a move, an action, and a bonus action. I'm happy that it's easy. I'm sad that sometimes I can't do the cool things I used to be able to do. Obviously, classes have special rules that allow more or different kind of actions the way that they're used within the economy. But it's sad to see people multi-class into fighter just so they can get an action surge so they can do something, quote, cool. I also wish I could boost an action up the economy line. If my spell is a bonus action, say magic weapon, and my Oath of Vengeance paladin wants to do a Vow of Enmity, you can't. You can't sacrifice your action to do either of those two. You must use the bonus action for both. So instead of giving up my attack to use the 2 bonus actions, I can only do one of them and then attack or do another main action. It seems nitpicky and an edge case, but it shuts down players' creativity to a point. A DM can fix this by allowing action escalation. This was a mechanic in 4th edition that was played around with, and it kind of worked. So maybe as a DM, you can do that for your table. Hence why it's in the bad. Another point is feats. I'm so glad that there aren't 100 books dedicated to feats. Each feat gives you a few cool abilities, and they aren't overpowered per se. They're not something that will give you a +1 here and a +1 there. They give you a multitude of different things at once. And the fact that you have to give up an ASI for it, except for Variant Human, decent trade-off, and I don't have any issues with the feats themselves. Yeah, remember, feats are a variant rule and not assumed, like they were in 3.x and Pathfinder. The monsters in the monster manual aren't built to go up against a party with great weapon masters and sharpshooters. I like the feats, but I put them in the bad section mainly because the DM has to do a lot of extra work to make the game more challenging to the PCs who have taken a variant rule and possibly made them stronger. And finally for the bad, I'm not necessarily happy with all the books that have been released. Again, these are nitpicky, and they can be solved with third-party sources or just using past edition content. I can't tell if WotC wants to put out DM toolkits to create their own adventures for DMs, or setting guides and adventure paths. If we're only going to get one book, maybe 2 at most a year, please don't smush the 2 different ideas into one book. Expand what you're trying to expand. A good example and a bad example. Ghosts of Saltmarsh put some classic modules together so that the DM had something ready-made to run, but it devoted enough of the book to tools the DM can use to run an aquatic adventure, as well as new enemy types and backgrounds to make it worth my while. It gives me everything I need, and yes, they could have given me more, but it was enough to keep me happy. As for Ravnica, they put in a very short adventure, but I still left that book going, that's it. The tools that they gave were great for factions and clans, and the info is indispensable if you want to run a game based on intrigue and cliques and clans. But I wish they would have given us more tools. They could have scrapped the adventure and added more, and this is why it's in the bad category. What they gave me was awesome, but what they gave me wasn't enough. That's just my personal opinion. I do wish that we had other setting guides between the Forgotten Realms, Eberron, and 2 Magic the Gathering settings. I, though, will give them props for their fan service for Wildmount, the Acquisitions Incorporated, and the Rick and Morty. So I will give them that. That's why I put it in the bad section. It is something that I can get over, but it's the ugly things that I can't get over. And now for the part that everyone probably really wants to hear. That is the ugly. It has been, in my experience, that a lot of the PCs brought to the table all feel samey. Now, before you scream at me because I haven't seen your off-meta wizard build, tell me honestly, how many games have you played with a warlock that didn't have Eldritch Blast? How many times have you played a cleric that didn't have healing spells? You can say that the classes are supposed to have certain powers and a cleric is supposed to heal, but my point is that when I look back at all the characters I've played and run for, most of them sort of run together. Again, this is very subjective, but what I have seen in my games is that most characters come built similar to one another. It's mainly because there are just some features and spells that are objectively better than others. I've never met a character that used True Strike, because it's kinda dumb, and I've never met a ranger that didn't have Hunter's Mark. What I'm trying to say is that there is some class combos and spells that are just better than others. In Adventurers League, you can't use one of the 354,000 revised rangers. You have to use the player's handbook Beastmaster if you want to use the Beastmaster, and no one wants to do that. It just doesn't work right. Tensor's Transformation, an 8th level spell that gives you proficiency with all armor for 10 minutes, is very rarely used because it takes 10 minutes to put armor on. Your warlocks, you always use Eldritch Blast because it's objectively better tricking out with all your invocations than it is to attempt to use your pact weapon. I know, I've tried multiple times, which is what brings me into my next point. The developers talk about the 3 pillars of play: exploration, roleplay, and combat. Well, I guess that these pillars aren't holding up the same things because the combat pillar is by far the biggest and most supported. We have very little rules for social interaction and roleplay, and in my homebrew tables, we really try to RP more, but in Adventurers League, there's no point. It's all about combat, and most AL games and homebrew alike reward players for having them fight. Most spells and class abilities are for combat. That leaves us DMs adapting older rules from past editions, like 10-minute exploration turns and reaction tables, just to give the game an air of a role-playing game. This would be okay if the game and the developers didn't keep harping on the 3 pillars of play, but it seems that only one pillar is what is cared for. It's a war game with light exploration and roleplay elements, not a role-playing game with some combat. If you're playing by the book, that's just how it is. And just to touch onto that point just a little bit more, that's the reason why you tend to see the same spells and the same classes and the same combos. Because why would I bring a bard to do some court intrigue in a game that doesn't really give the DM enough support to allow them to run a court intrigue kind of game? That's why I put that in the ugly. Now, let's go on to the CR system. It doesn't really work. So it's a tool that is in the game to help the DM springboard and counter ideas. It's broken, and this genuinely makes me annoyed. I'm lucky to have been running the game long enough to look at a stat block and just have a feel for it and know if it'll work for my table. This is not the case for newer DMs who want to make their own encounters. You have to read into the monsters, know their action economy in contrast to the PCs, and you say that this is what the job of the GM is in the first place? But all I want is a system in the game that is trying to pass off as helpful to actually be helpful. 4th edition did it well. Pathfinder even mostly does it well. We have a broken game mechanic that clearly doesn't work, and that's why it's ugly. What also doesn't work is tier 4 play. You can probably hear the slight annoyance in my voice coming out. I try to be very kind. I'm trying to be kind. I love the game. I'm telling you, I do. The support for anything over level 15 is minimal, and afterthought compared to levels 1 through 10. If the game is advertised as a game for levels 1 through 20, then how come the rules support just suddenly drops off? High tier, high level magic is yawn-inducing, and the cool ones that we do get, like Wish, don't really have a whole lot of guidelines to them. Higher tiered monsters are fewer in number, although with some of the newer additions from new books, this is getting better, so I will give them credit for that. Why not just make a game for levels 1 through 10 or 1 through 15? Why are all these posts on Reddit and Twitter of DMs saying, "Help, high tier level play sucks"? If the game is supposed to support a playstyle of high level godlike adventures, how come it doesn't support it? And lastly, this is the most subjective part here, is that I'm just burned out on the game. I keep having to use third-party and homebrew options and settings just to keep the excitement alive for me and my jaded players. This ugly point, again, is more on me and less on the game as a whole, but it just feels tired. I'm not saying it's on life support for me, but the shot of caffeine that the awesome third-party books like anything from PB Publishing keeps injecting into my games are wearing out, and maybe I just need a rest from the game. Phew, okay. Ramble over. Everyone, I'm not trying to be on the soapbox here. I still like the game mostly, and there's some stuff that I'm just tired of. Let us know in the comments if you agree or disagree with it. Overall, I do like the game. It's just, I am looking for something that hasn't been given to me just yet. I'm sure I missed something. Let's be civil about this in the comments below. We do critique things because we like them and we want to see them get better, and that's what this was. My subjective take on the 6 years of D&D 5th edition and how I want to see it grow and get better. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Have a great day, everyone, and game on.